At 10:30 a.m. on April 7, 1943, a massive shadow fell over Guadalcanal, First Lieutenant James. Swett spotted a force of 150 Japanese planes. He was a 22-year-old rookie, with only 197 hours logged in his F4F Wildcat, about to fly his first combat sortie. The enemy formation was colossal, 67. Val dive bombers escorted by 110 Zero fighters. It was the largest Japanese aerial assault since the Battle of Midway, 9 months prior. Marine Fighter Squadron. VMF-221 had been based on Guadalcanal for a mere 63 days. Swett had been restricted to uneventful patrols since February. He'd seen no enemy contact, no action. April 7th had already meant 2 quiet patrols. When the scramble order came at 10:20 a.m., he fully expected another dry run. Intelligence noted heightened Japanese radio activity, but false alarms were routine. The cycle was predictable. Radio chatter rose, radar showed ghosts, fighters launched, and found nothing. This time it was different. His division commander was Captain Joseph Foss, already an ace with 26 confirmed kills. Foss led 4 Wildcats off Henderson Field, climbing sharply northwest. They had roughly 15 minutes before the enemy bombers reached the Allied fleet near Tulagi. At 8,000 feet, Swett saw the terrifying sight. The sky was dense with aircraft. He counted 15 Val bombers in the lead V formation. More waves stretched back toward the horizon. Zero escorts hovered high above, maintaining a 3,000-foot altitude advantage. The odds were astronomical. 37 Japanese planes for every American fighter in the air. 4 Wildcats were no match for the Zero's superior flight envelope. The Wildcat's maximum speed was 318 mph at 19,000 feet. The Zero could hit 350 mph and outclimb the F4F by 1,500 feet per minute. But the Wildcat was a fortress. It was engineered to absorb enormous damage and remain airborne. Its 650 caliber Browning machine guns delivered lethal close-range firepower, with 24 seconds of continuous fire per gun if he held the trigger. Swett ran his final checks. Oil pressure, normal. Fuel, sufficient for an hour's fight. He flipped the gun sight switch. The illuminated pipper centered perfectly in the reflector glass. He moved the master armament switch to the armed position. The charging handles were already pulled back, 6 barrels loaded and ready. He had never test-fired these guns on an enemy, having only seen them in training photographs. Foss positioned the division for a head-on pass against the leading bomber group. The Vals were already initiating their bombing dives toward the transport ships anchored near Tulagi Harbor. Swett followed Foss down through 8,000 feet. At 400 yards, Foss opened fire. His tracers streamed toward the lead Val. The bomber's engine erupted in an orange fireball. It inverted violently and plummeted into the sea below. Swett locked onto the second bomber in the formation. Range 350 yards, closing fast. He centered the glowing pipper on the cockpit and squeezed the trigger. The Wildcat shuddered as all 6 guns barked simultaneously. Spent brass casings flew from the wing ports. The Val's canopy shattered. The bomber flipped over, dropped away, and began trailing thick smoke. His first kill. Could this green pilot survive the subsequent onslaught? A brief placeholder here for the audience prompt our transition. Back in Swett's cockpit, he shifted his aim to another Val and fired a 3-second burst. The bomber's left wing separated cleanly at the root joint. 2 kills in 40 seconds. He yanked the stick hard right to evade a Zero that was diving straight at him. The enemy fighter flashed past, missing his canopy by maybe 10 feet. Swett rolled right into a tight climbing turn. His division was scattered in the initial mayhem. He was alone now. Below, the remaining Vals continued their runs toward the ships. Swett pushed the stick forward, diving after them. His airspeed soared past 400 miles per hour. The Wildcat's control surfaces stiffened under the immense air pressure. He targeted the closest bomber and fired a short burst. The bomber exploded. 3 kills in under 6 minutes. Swett recovered from the dive at 2,000 feet and searched the turbulent sky. His heart was hammering, but his hands were steady on the stick. Training had paid off. Hundreds of cockpit hours prepared him for this single instant. Above, another group of 15 Vals was forming up for a run. They flew in 3 tight V formations of 5 aircraft. They hadn't noticed him yet. Their attention was fixed on the ships below. The lead group rolled into its dive toward the destroyer USS Aaron. Ward. Swett climbed back to 6,000 feet. positioning himself above and behind the trailing Val in the first group. He dove from the optimal position directly above, with the sun at his back, the classic attacker's advantage. At 200 yards, he opened fire with a 4-second burst, unloading 296 rounds. The Val's tail assembly disintegrated under the concentrated .50 caliber fire. The bomber spun out of control and slammed into the ocean, trailing smoke and wreckage. 4 kills. His ammo counter showed he'd expended about 600 rounds, half his total. 840 rounds remained, enough for 14 more seconds of firing. He immediately banked left toward the second group of Vals. His dive speed carried him through their formation. He selected the nearest target and centered the pipper. He fired. The Val exploded midair, a direct hit on the bomb it was carrying. The resulting detonation was massive, scattering debris. 5 kills in 9 minutes. The remaining bombers in that group broke formation immediately. Some stubbornly pressed their attack despite Swett's presence, whether from individual courage or rigid orders, he couldn't know. He stayed on them. His 6th kill came 30 seconds later. A Val trying to escape at low altitude toward the Florida Islands. Swett dove after it, firing from 150 yards directly behind, the perfect firing envelope. His tracers walked up the fuselage and ignited the fuel tank. The bomber erupted in orange flame and cartwheeled into the water. 6 kills. His ammunition was critically low, maybe 400 rounds left, 6 or 7 seconds of firing time maximum. Swett pulled up sharply, scanning for targets. His wingmen were out of sight. The radio was pure chaos. Overlapping transmissions from pilots calling out threats and positions. Below, the Allied ship's anti-aircraft fire created a deadly defensive curtain of exploding shells. 5-inch guns fired proximity-fused rounds. 40mm Bofors quad mounts tracked bombers. 20mm Oerlikons added streams of tracers. Black flak bursts filled the air around him. Then he spotted another Val starting its dive toward the cargo ships near Gavutu. Swett rolled inverted and pulled through into a split S maneuver. The negative G-force was brutal. His vision grayed at the edges as blood rushed to his head. His helmet slammed against the canopy. He tracked the Val through his sight as both planes plummeted toward Tulagi Harbor. The altimeter spun rapidly. 5,000 feet. 4,000, 3,000. The Val's rear gunner opened fire. Swett saw the muzzle flashes. Tracers streaked past his canopy. At 1,000 feet, Swett fired. A 2-second burst, maybe 130 rounds. The Val's engine instantly caught fire. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The bomber crashed into the harbor near Gavutu Island in a massive plume of water. 7 kills in 12 minutes. Swett pulled out of his dive just above the water. The gun counter barely registered, hovering just above 0. The transport ships were directly beneath him, placing him inside their defensive fire zone, the most perilous airspace in the battle. Every gun was firing at maximum rate. At this speed and altitude, gunners couldn't differentiate him from a Japanese bomber. He was just another target. Above, he spotted one last Val beginning its attack dive, his 8th potential kill. He had ammo left, perhaps 250 rounds, 3 or 4 seconds of firing time. He climbed toward the bomber, but the Wildcat felt sluggish. The controls were heavy and unresponsive. His instruments looked normal. Then something slammed into his left wing. The impact was immediate and violent. The aircraft lurched hard left. Swett fought the controls with both hands, applying full right aileron and rudder. He looked out. A gaping 2-foot hole was punched straight through the structure. Metal skin peeled back around the edges. A 40mm Bofors shell from an Allied ship had hit him. Friendly fire. Fuel poured from the ruptured tank, leaving a white vapor trail. The Wildcat was still airborne, but just barely. The damaged wing created huge drag, and his airspeed bled off fast. He couldn't maintain altitude. The Val he was chasing pulled away effortlessly. Swett fired his last desperate burst, emptying the rest of his ammunition. His tracers fell short by 50 yards. The Val escaped into the northern clouds. His guns clicked empty. All 1,140 rounds were gone in less than 15 minutes. Warning lights flashed on the panel. Oil pressure dropping, coolant temperature climbing into the red. He looked at his engine cowling. The paint was blistering. The enemy rear gunner must have scored a hit during that last attack. His oil cooler was damaged. Thick black smoke, not coolant vapor, poured from the engine compartment, indicating burning oil. The temperature gauge soared. Past the maximum operating range, 210, circle text, Kai, subtribo circle text C. 235 circle text C. At 240 circle text C, the engine seized. The propeller stopped instantly. The sudden silence was deafening after 15 minutes of non-stop combat. No engine roar, only the rushing whistle of air over the torn wing. Swett was 3 miles from Henderson Field with a dead engine, a ruined wing, and a fuel leak. The Wildcat dropped fast, 500 feet per minute. Then 700. The asymmetrical drag made gliding impossible. 2 options. Try for the impossible 3-mile glide to Henderson, or ditch in the water. At this rate, he'd cover maybe 1 mile before impact. Henderson was out. He scanned the water. The harbor was filled with ships and wreckage, too dangerous. He needed open water. He spotted a clear, calm area north of Gavutu Island, away from traffic. He turned toward it, sacrificing altitude to position himself for the landing. The Wildcat descended through 1,000 feet. 800, 600. Swett ran his ditching checklist from memory. Canopy open? Already done. Harness tight? Check. Radio? He transmitted his position one final time. No reply. The radio was likely damaged. He loosened his oxygen mask. At 400 feet, he realized a critical mistake. He'd forgotten to jettison his canopy. An open canopy would snag the water upon impact and flip the aircraft. He reached up and released the locks. The plexiglass tore away into the slipstream and vanished behind him. At 200 feet, he prepared. The water rushed up. He held the nose slightly high to keep the tail down. The tail struck first, exactly as he'd practiced. The impact was enormous, throwing him forward against his harness. His face smashed into the instrument panel. His nose broke instantly. Blood filled his oxygen mask. The Wildcat bounced once, then settled. Water surged into the cockpit. The plane was sinking rapidly. Swett released his harness and tried to stand. He couldn't move. Something held him, his parachute. The shroud lines had deployed somehow during the ditching, wrapping around his legs and the control stick. He was tangled. The water rose past his knees, waist, chest. He pulled desperately at the lines, but they only tightened. The Wildcat's nose dipped as the engine compartment flooded. The plane was going under. The water reached his neck. He took a final deep breath just as the water closed over his head. Underwater, it was dark and chaotic. The parachute canopy had partially opened and wrapped around him like a shroud. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe. His lungs burned. He fumbled for his survival knife, standard issue on his belt. His fingers found the handle. He pulled it free and began cutting the shroud lines. 1, 2. The lines were thick nylon. The knife was sharp, but cutting underwater was agonizingly difficult. His lungs screamed for air. 4, 5. Time was up. His vision narrowed, the edges darkening. 6, 7. Suddenly, he was free. His Mae West life vest was still deflated. He hadn't had time to activate it. He kicked toward the surface, which seemed impossibly distant. His boots were full of water, pulling him down. His soaked flight suit was a lead weight. He kicked one more time. His head broke the surface. He gasped, blood and seawater flooding his mouth. He coughed violently, treading water. His nose throbbed. He could barely breathe through it. He reached for the CO2. Inflation toggles on his Mae West, nothing. He pulled again. Still nothing. The inflation mechanism had failed. He was treading water in full flight gear without flotation. The nearest land was Gavutu Island, half a mile away. Swett's flight boots were for carrier decks, not swimming. Each held gallons of water. His leather jacket was heavy. His flight suit felt like lead. He struggled to remove the boots, but couldn't reach the laces while treading water. Waves washed over him, forcing him to swallow seawater and cough. His broken nose made breathing through his mouth his only option. Blood streamed from his nostrils. He remembered his one-man life raft attached to his harness. He reached behind his back and found the pack. He pulled the inflation lanyard. Nothing. He pulled again, harder. Still nothing. The CO2 cartridge was either damaged or corroded. The raft was useless. He was alone, with no flotation or raft. His arms tired quickly. His legs felt like concrete. He looked for rescue. The battle was still raging overhead. Wildcats chased Vals toward Rabaul. Anti-aircraft fire continued. Nobody was looking for downed pilots yet. The priority was the bombers. He was on his own. Gavutu Island was his only hope, half a mile of open ocean. He began swimming with a modified side stroke to conserve strength. Every third stroke, he had to stop and tread water to catch his breath. The pain in his nose made each breath shallow and agonizing. After 5 minutes, he'd covered maybe 100 yards. His arms burned. His legs cramped. The leather jacket was drowning him. He stopped swimming and fought his way out of the jacket. It sank instantly. He stripped his flight suit down to his waist. It helped slightly. He resumed swimming. Another 100 yards and he stopped to rest. His breathing was ragged, desperate. The blood from his nose continued to flow, attracting attention he didn't want. The first shark appeared from below, a dark shape rising through the blue water. Maybe 8 feet long, a reef shark. It circled once at 15 feet and descended back into the gloom. Swett forced himself to be calm. Panic would invite an attack. He resumed swimming, slow, steady strokes. No splashing. Controlled movement toward the island. The shark returned 2 minutes later, bringing 2 others. They circled beneath him, their movements lazy, curious. Not attacking yet. Just investigating. Swett was 200 yards from Gavutu when exhaustion finally overwhelmed him. His arms gave up. His legs stopped kicking. He was floating, held barely above water by the air trapped in his flight suit. The shark circled closer, now 10 feet below. He tried to kick but had no strength left. His vision began to narrow again, the edges going dark. He was going to drown within sight of land, or the sharks would finish him. Then he heard it. An engine. A boat engine. He tried to turn his head but couldn't. His neck muscles had failed. A voice shouted, an American accent. He tried to respond but only managed a weak cough. Strong hands grabbed him and hauled him from the water. Coast Guard. A rescue boat watching for downed pilots. They dragged him over the gunwale and laid him flat on the deck. Swett lay there gasping like a landed fish. Blood and seawater poured from his nose and mouth. A Coast Guardsman examined him quickly. The assessment was professional. Broken nose, multiple contusions, possible concussion, severe exhaustion, and near drowning, but alive. Swett tried to sit up, but the guardsman pressed him down. "Stay still!" The boat turned toward Tulagi and sped off. The ride took 8 minutes. They pulled alongside a dock where a Navy medical corpsman waited with a stretcher. Swett refused the stretcher. He stood on his own, though his legs barely supported him. The corpsman led him to a medical tent. Inside, the corpsman cleaned the blood and examined his nose. Definitely broken. Likely from hitting the instrument panel during the ditching. The corpsman packed his nostrils with gauze and bandaged his head. Swett looked like a mummy. The corpsman offered morphine, but Swett refused. He needed to stay alert. The battle might not be over. The corpsman moved to other casualties. The tent quickly filled with wounded sailors from the ships hit during the raid. Swett walked outside and found a jeep heading back to Henderson Field. The driver, a Marine supply sergeant, had watched the fight from the ground. The sergeant asked if Swett had seen the pilot who shot down all those Vals. Swett said nothing. The jeep ride took 20 minutes over rough coral roads. They arrived at Henderson Field at 11:45 a.m., 75 minutes after Swett had taken off. It felt like 75 hours. Captain Foss was waiting on the flight line. His Wildcat sat on the hard stand, guns empty, engine ticking as it cooled. Foss had landed 10 minutes prior. He saw Swett climb from the jeep and walked over. Foss looked at the bandages and asked if he was okay. Swett nodded. Foss asked how many Vals Swett had shot down. Swett said 7. Maybe 8. He wasn't certain about the last one. Foss stared at him, speechless for a moment. Then Foss called over the squadron intelligence officer, First Lieutenant Morrison. Morrison, clipboard and map in hand, interviewed Swett for 30 minutes, asking for specific details on each kill. Time, location, aircraft type, attack angle, and observed result. Swett described each engagement precisely. Morrison marked the locations on his map. The geography matched witness reports from ships and other pilots. Morrison counted the marks. 7 confirmed kills, all within 15 minutes, all on Swett's first combat mission. Morrison looked up from his clipboard and asked Swett's age. 22, Swett replied. How many combat missions before today? 0, Swett confirmed. This was my first. Morrison slowly shook his head. He had debriefed hundreds of missions for VMF-221. He had never heard of anyone becoming an ace on their first mission. Never heard of 7 kills in 15 minutes. Never heard of anything remotely like this? The news spread through Henderson Field in an hour. 7 kills. First mission. Shot down by friendly fire. Ditched in shark-infested water. Nearly drowned. Rescued at the last moment. Pilots flocked to see Swett. Some offered congratulations. Others just wanted to confirm the story. By evening, every pilot on Guadalcanal knew the name James Swett. Within a week, every naval aviator in the Pacific would know it. But the recognition was only beginning. Admiral William Halsey, commander of all Allied forces in the South Pacific, heard the report 3 days later. Halsey had reviewed thousands of combat reports. Pilot claims were often inflated. Adrenaline and confusion made accurate counting difficult. But Swett's 7 kills were confirmed by multiple sources: ship observers, other pilots, and the undeniable physical evidence. 7 Japanese Val bombers had crashed within sight of the fleet, all within the 15-minute window of Swett's engagement, and all matching his described attack patterns and locations. Halsey recognized exceptional performance. On April 10th, just 3 days post-battle, he personally recommended Swett for the Medal of Honor. The citation would note 7 confirmed kills in a single mission, shot down by friendly fire while defending the fleet, successfully ditched and survived. The recommendation went up the chain of command. On October 10, 1943, Swett received the medal from Halsey at a ceremony on Espiritu Santo. The ceremony drew war correspondents. Swett's story embodied the spirit the American public needed in 1943. Young, Marine pilot, first combat mission, 7 enemy aircraft, survived impossible odds. Life magazine ran a feature. Swett became a symbol of American fighting spirit. Other naval aviators adopted his name as a benchmark. To do a Jimmy Swett meant achieving ace status in one sortie, the ultimate goal for every trainee. But Swett didn't stop flying. He returned to VMF-221, continuing combat missions from Henderson Field and later from other bases, as the war progressed north. By August 1943, he'd accumulated 15.5 confirmed kills. The half kill was a shared credit with another pilot. He was shot down twice more, once over Vela La Vela and a second time over Rabaul. Both times he survived. The second shootdown led to a 3-day jungle ordeal before friendly natives found him and paddled him back to Allied lines in a dugout canoe. Swett rotated back to the U.S. in late 1943 for instructor duty at Naval Air Station Jacksonville, Florida. He taught new pilots everything he'd learned. Attack from above and behind. Close to the water, you are vulnerable. Watch for friendly fire near ships. Always know your fuel and the nearest friendly field. Most importantly, stay calm. Panic kills more pilots than enemy fire. After the war in August 1945, Swett remained in the Marine Corps Reserve, flying F4U Corsairs during the Korean War, though he saw no combat. He retired as a colonel in 1970. Logging over 5,000 military flight hours, he settled in Northern California and rarely spoke of the Medal of Honor or the April 7th mission, often attributing his success to luck. Right place, right time. Good training. Nothing more. James Swett died on January 15, 2009, at age 88. He was buried with full military honors at Quantico National Cemetery. Hundreds of Marines, naval aviators, and family members attended. The Medal of Honor citation was read aloud, detailing his actions on April 7, 1943, 7. Enemy aircraft destroyed. Continued fighting despite damage to his aircraft. Successfully ditched and survived. The citation concluded with a phrase that defined his career: extraordinary heroism and disregard for his own safety. The April 7th raid on Tulagi was the final major Japanese air offensive in the Solomon Islands campaign. The Japanese lost 42 aircraft. American losses were 7 fighters. Swett personally accounted for 1/6 of all Japanese losses. His performance influenced tactical doctrine for the rest of the war. Flight instructors used his engagement as a case study. Attack decisively, conserve ammunition, maintain situational awareness, accept calculated risks but don't be reckless. These principles became standard training for all Marine fighter pilots. The mission proved that thorough training could overcome lack of experience. Swett had 197 flight hours and had never fired his guns in combat. Yet his preparation was so effective that he